One silent night, wails could be heard echoing throughout the forest, terrifying all who lived nearby. It wasn't the first time such fearful sounds could be heard, and it sure wasn't the last. Recently, news have been spreading about a forbidden mansion, surrounded by a dense forest far away from the city. It's been said that evil spirits haunt the mansion, ready to reap the poor souls that wander into their domain. The story spread like wildfire, gripping the hearts of people with paranoia. Its grasp tightened with each new person that went missing every night. Like any other story, this twisted tale began with an unassuming scene. The streets of the inner city bustle with people trying to make it to work, but not the Bonds. No. The Bonds already have made it in life. Jackson Bond ran a successful trading business with his dear friend and partner. To add to his picture-perfect life, Jackson was married to his wonderful wife, Margaret Bond, and had a cute, adorable daughter named Rosemary Bond. Jackson, Margaret, and Rosemary lived happily ever after, or so they thought. Jackson received news that his friends had gathered supporters to oust him from his own business due to his lack of ambition and growth. However, everyone in the inner circle knew the real reason: greed and envy. And with that cruel and selfish act, the curtain slowly drew close on the Bond family. That evening, Jackson returned home hiding his sorrows behind a big grin. He ate dinner with his loving wife and wonderful daughter. Both were blissfully unaware of the turmoil inside him. After making sure they were asleep, Jackson calmly walked to the heart of his mansion and hung himself, leaving behind a small letter explaining the truth of what had happened. Jackson's death meant the downfall of the Bond family. With their business stolen and the family's pillar gone, there was no support left for the Bond family, and they slowly lost their wealth. They did their best to keep up appearances and hid the fact that the family was bankrupt. 2 long years passed, and the adorable young Rosemary had grown into a beautiful woman. Despite losing their fortune, her looks earned her a spot in the upper-class society, with many men trying to woo her. Margaret saw this as an opportunity for the Bond's name to survive. She pushed and pushed for her daughter to meet as many new people as she could. From parties to balls to city gatherings, Margaret made Rosemary attend it all. Rosemary gladly accepted her mother's request. She used her charm to seduce wealthy businessmen in hopes of getting a man that could provide her a luxurious lifestyle and a chance to bring the family back to its former glory. With every event she attended, Rosemary's popularity grew. It grew and grew to the point she received an endless streams of invite to every party in town. She eventually met someone who fit what she was looking for, a rich young businessman who had been following her for a while. The two pursued a relationship and the man fell in love with her, not realizing she had a hidden motive. Rosemary eventually moved in with the man. It was then she found out that he had a secret of his own. The man was already married and she was only his mistress. Rosemary felt disgusted and wanted to run away, but poor Rosemary couldn't do that. Where would she go? She didn't want to return to a life of poverty after all. Margaret convinced her to endure it for the betterment of their lives and for their family. Even though life inside the new home wasn't what she expected, Rosemary was allowed to have a luxurious lifestyle and even monthly allowances. And so Rosemary stayed. But all good things must come to an end. As if a curse shadowed the Bond family, the businessman fell victim to a serious disease, his symptoms growing worse with each day. He received the best medicine and care money could buy, but it wasn't enough to save his life. And just like that, Rosemary's chance at living the rest of her life in luxury disappeared. She lost everything she gained to the man's wife and was exiled from the place she had been calling home. With her dreams shattered and unable to accept anything less than a comfortable life, Rosemary returned to her old routine. She rejoined the high society parties, dancing away and luring men with her body. Her reckless lifestyle soon gained her an infamous reputation for being a tramp. All the men that approached her were only after her beauty and her body. There was no love to be found. Anyone can have her, they whispered amongst themselves. In an unfortunate turn of events, Rosemary found herself pregnant. She prayed that it was a mistake, a bad dream, and that she'll wake up to find that the baby was not real. But the bump in her belly defied her. Rosemary tried to abort the child, but was quickly stopped by Margaret. "To do so would be to eternally damn yourself," she cried. "Please don't do it. It's dangerous and will risk your life as well." Relenting, Rosemary carried the baby to term. She couldn't wait to expel the burden inside of her. She hid from all her social circles, afraid of ridicule and exclusion. The money she had left went into nurturing her own body in preparation for giving birth and paying off the doctor for his silence. After 9 long months, Rosemary gave birth to a cute little boy. But as destiny would have it, he would face the worst fate of all the Bonds. The poor baby boy didn't even receive a name from his mother before she discarded him. Rosemary wanted nothing to do with him and quickly wanted him gone from her sight. But Margaret couldn't just let the child die. He was still a Bond, so she took it upon herself to ensure the baby's survival. However, if word got out that Rosemary had a child out of wedlock, her status would be ruined for good. The child had to remain a secret. Margaret found a caretaker for her grandson, an old family friend named Albert. She trusted him to keep their secret, and the two set up an agreement. Margaret will pay Albert for taking care of the baby, and if anyone asked, Albert will claim him as his own nephew. Albert was a butler to an infamous and eccentric scientist, Benjamin Whistledown, who was well known within the science and medical communities of the time. Benjamin chose to live a mysterious and isolated lifestyle, and the Whistledown mansion was located far away from the city, making Albert the perfect caretaker for the baby. At the time, only Albert lived at the mansion. Many years prior, Benjamin had mysteriously disappeared, leaving a faithful Albert to tend to the mansion, awaiting his master's return. For 5 years, Albert raised the child, whom he named Edison, in secret. With each year, Edison's curiosity and questions about his origin grew. "Who are my parents? Where are they?" he asked. But Albert would avoid the question and tell Edison that he asked his parents if he could raise him. As days went by, Albert's payments came irregularly until it stopped altogether. This, combined with Edison's unending barrage of questions, became too much, and he lashed out at Edison verbally. Edison didn't understand what he did wrong. All he wanted to know was where he came from, but every time he asked, he never got an answer. Though he stopped asking, the topic was something he couldn't let go of. For the next 4 years, Edison lived with Albert without a single visit from his mother or grandmother. Albert, who had gotten used to living alone in the mansion, was surprised Benjamin unexpectedly came home one day. He quickly hid Edison and demanded he stayed out of sight. Benjamin had returned from the southeast with a mysterious tome. Unbeknownst to him, he also brought back an infectious disease. What started off as a light cough and sniffing turned into something chronic. However, Benjamin shrugged it off, confident that it was something his body could overcome. Benjamin's cough gradually became worse over time, and his ailing health forced him to stop ignoring his illness and develop a cure alongside his horrid experiments. As Edison grew, so did his curiosity. For 3 years, he watched Benjamin's research, enthralled by the experiments. "I'm going to become a scientist, just like him," he passionately thought to himself. Excited to know more about the experiments, Edison turned to Albert and pestered him for answers. His questions were always met with a scolding. "I told you to stay hidden. Why are you risking being seen?" would always be the answer he receives. But as time went on, Albert saw Edison's genuine curiosity and eventually yielded and finally gave Edison proper answers. He explained how he helped Benjamin and even told Benjamin's backstory. Benjamin once had a loving family of his own, but one day, fate stole his wife and son from him. The death of his family drove Benjamin insane. He kept their corpses in the lab instead of burying them and would perform experiments on them. Once, Edison crept down to watch Benjamin in his lab. He saw a child his age facing towards Benjamin. The boy looked wrinkly and skinny, like he had been sucked dry by something, and his eyes were hollow and lifeless. Edison couldn't look away. It wasn't until later Edison learned Benjamin was trying to revive his son. Time passed and the disease had eaten its way through Benjamin's body. It was through sheer willpower and the desire to complete his experiments and cure that kept Benjamin going. Unaware of the contagion, Albert and Edison also had become infected. Benjamin got very close to discovering the cure, but in the end, he couldn't escape the Reaper's swing. He died before he could realize any of his goals. Benjamin's death proved to be Edison's fortune. He no longer had to hide and finally had access to all of Benjamin's tools and a library full of research. But as Edison soon found out, his fortune came with a warning. Being young and spry, the effects of the disease were slow to show on Edison. However, after seeing Albert's condition worsen every day, he knew that the both of them weren't safe, and that death would come for them as well. With that realization, Edison wasted no time in continuing Benjamin's cure. He tested over and over before succeeding with one of the formulas. His tests on the animals he found in the house proved that the vaccine was effective. Without further hesitation, he injected himself. But things didn't go as planned. The shot was ineffective on humans. Luckily, Edison still had time. He continued to research and test it on himself, suffering multiple side effects until his body became thin and frail. The disease has progressed to the point both Edison and Albert did not have much time left. The next trial would be his last. It was do or die. With his resolve steeled, he made one shot and injected himself with it. His heart beat faster and faster, and suddenly Edison found himself sprawled on the floor. So this is it, he thought. As he slowly lost consciousness, his last regret was that he couldn't save Albert. Edison never expected to be jolted awake by the warm sensation on his skin as the sunlight shone on him. The boy discovered that his body was fully healed and the disease was no more. In fact, he felt even better than before and his senses keener. Edison couldn't wait to tell Albert the good news. Upon seeing Edison jumping around in excitement, Albert gained hope, believing he would also be cured. Edison mixed the same formula of drugs for Albert. He injected the vaccine into Albert, and for a while, Albert's condition visibly improved before worsening even faster. The medicine had backfired and accelerated the disease instead. Albert blamed Edison and accused him of orchestrating his death. Albert died cursing the bonds with his last breath. The cure that was meant to save had killed the only caretaker Edison had, and he blamed himself for this failure. With no one else left alive, Edison was the sole occupant of the mansion. He channeled his sadness towards completing Benjamin's other projects. Edison found the mysterious tome Benjamin had left behind and began to replicate the resurrection research. The tome called for a chemical that could only be found in the basal ganglia of a living human as the main ingredient for a resurrection potion. That night, Edison headed towards the closest city in search of materials and lab rats. He came across a group of homeless people and decided they were perfect for his needs. He returned with food laced with sleeping powder and waited until they fell unconscious. Excited to continue his experiments, Edison quickly extracted the chemicals from the people he caught, uncaring that he killed them in the process. The harvested chemicals glowed red in his hands. After gathering all the materials, Edison skipped back to his lab, humming with anticipation. He mixed the chemicals together with other solutions, resulting in a deep, rich purple mixture. He found Benjamin's wife's corpse and injected it with the concoction. Slowly but surely, the corpse started to move before letting out a bone-chilling scream. "I succeeded!" Edison cheered, but as the celebration left his lips, the corpse shuddered and collapsed, dead once again. Edison refused to give up. He continued to experiment on the body of Benjamin's son and Albert to further his knowledge, but alas, he was met with the same results. Thinking back to when he saw Benjamin work on his son all those years ago, he empathized with the dead scientist. One day while falling asleep, Edison thought back to Albert's dying words. He couldn't help but become curious as to who the Bonds really are and why Albert had cursed them so. He went into Albert's room and found a diary sitting by the headrest. Edison searched through the book until he found a page about him. Edison, the entry started. "We never had any blood relations. I've always lied to you about being your uncle. You were part of the great Bond family, a once wealthy and prestigious family. Your grandfather was a businessman, but he was betrayed by his partner, causing him to take his own life. Your grandmother, Margaret Bond, was someone from the upper-class society, and they had a daughter, Rosemary Bond, your mother. After the family went bankrupt, your mother had an unwanted pregnancy, leading her to abandon you. The only reason I took you in was out of pity. How could they abandon such an innocent child? They asked me to take care of you and paid me in return for keeping you a secret. At first, things went per our deal, but the payments stopped coming and we eventually lost all contact. I later found out that Margaret fell ill and passed away. Even though I stopped receiving payments, I was happy to look after you. Our bond had more value than any amount of money they ever paid me." As he finished reading, warm tears trickled down Edison's face for the first time since he was a baby. 1,000 questions filled his mind, but one stood out from them all. Why didn't my mother love me? He longed for his mother's love to chase away his loneliness. In search of his only family left, Edison abandoned the mansion and sought out his mother. He tracked her whereabouts from clues, traveling from town to town, hoping to find whatever he could about her. His persistence led him to find 2 men making fun of his mother. Hearing that, Edison became furious and he wanted to kill them both. but he had to wait because he needed them to lead him to his mother. Edison followed them to an elegant banquet. Without proper invitation, he had to quietly sneak in. Once inside, a beautiful woman surrounded by many men caught his eye. Edison overheard the other partygoers talk about the woman and listened into their conversation. Some of them jeered at her, others complimenting her. Through them, he learned that the woman was undoubtedly Rosemary. He had found his mother at last. But Edison couldn't accept that his mother was in such a sorry state. Men surrounded her, eating her up with hungry eyes as she shamelessly flirted with them. Edison couldn't stand it anymore and decided to leave. He would keep his distance, but he wasn't about to let his mother out of sight again. Even though Edison couldn't wait to meet his mother, he repressed his desires and observed her from the shadows. For one long month, the boy followed his mother's every action while killing anyone who badmouthed her. He couldn't stand seeing his mother being bullied and teased. The mother, unaware of her son's actions, continued her days in ignorance. Edison also noticed something wrong with Rosemary. She seemed sickly and pale, and every day her condition worsened to the point he had to step in and intervene. As Rosemary left the party one night, Edison stealthily followed her through the dark alley. Oblivious that she's being followed, Rosemary entered her home. She lit her lantern before taking it up to her room, but as she entered, the soft light casted an unexpected shadow. "Hello, Mother. It's me." Edison's eerie greetings were the last thing she heard before falling unconscious to the sleeping spray he had dispersed in her room. Edison's desire to improve Rosemary's life and mold his mom into the perfect parent he never had was the only thing that mattered to him now. He made sure she was out cold before whisking her away into the night. Edison hurriedly brought Rosemary back to the mansion and laid her down in one of the open rooms. He waited with her until she regained consciousness. When Rosemary woke up in an unknown room, she was terrified of Edison. The boy tried to explain to his mother what happened and that he was trying to help her. Even though Edison offered her treatment, Rosemary didn't believe him. She only saw him as a child that couldn't possibly do what he said he would. All Rosemary wanted to do was leave the mansion. She begged Edison to let her go, but he refused her every time. Rosemary tried to escape the mansion several times, but no matter how careful she planned, Edison would always capture her and return her back to her room. After numerous failed attempts, she knew her only way out was to kill Edison. The next day, Edison brought his mother food as usual. And as usual, she sat with her back facing him. Edison, thinking nothing of it, placed her food on the table before heading out the door. Suddenly, Rosemary lunged at Edison with a knife. She aimed to take Edison's life, but Edison's heightened senses allowed him to dodge in the nick of time. The knife grazed his cheek, leaving a big gash, but not as big as the wound she left in his heart. He quickly disarmed Rosemary and left the room, double-checking the locks that were in place. His mother's attempt on his life drove him further into self-wallowing. "Why doesn't she love me?" he cried. Edison only wanted the best for his mom, and yet his actions were rewarded with violence. "Am I wrong for wanting a loving mom? No, I'm not wrong. She is." Edison wiped his tears and resolved to fix his mom. He could perform brain surgery on her to create the ideal mother. A mother who loves him and cares for him. A mother that would never abandon him. While doing so, he could cure her illness too. That evening, Edison carefully brought his mom food, but this time he laced it with sedatives. As soon as Rosemary fell asleep from the drugs, he brought her to the lab. Edison began the long and difficult surgery on her. Once it was over, he anxiously waited for Rosemary to wake up. At first, she looked at him with a blank expression, but it soon turned into fear and hatred for him. Edison was confused at her reaction. He thought the surgery was successful, and yet Rosemary still hated him. Unsatisfied, Edison performed many more surgeries on her, each surgery leaving him with the same result as before. But Edison never gave up. His tenacious personality kept him going. Little by little, the repeated surgeries chipped away at Rosemary's mind. Finally, one day while Rosemary was recovering from her surgery, she woke up and looked upon Edison with a loving gaze. Edison was overwhelmed with joy and rushed towards his mother. Oh, how he waited for this day! He checked her over, making sure that this time his surgery succeeded for real. For once, luck was on his side. After a thorough exam, Edison found that he could fully control Rosemary. He had successfully created his ideal mother. No more fear, no more hatred. Edison could finally bask in his mother's love for the first time. Even though Rosemary was treating him lovingly, Edison was still wary of his mom and kept her locked in the same room as before. With his main objective complete, Edison devoted his time to find a cure for Rosemary's illnesses she got from living so recklessly. During her time with him, her symptoms had intensified. Once more, luck favored him. Edison was able to create a cure for Rosemary, and soon she returned to her former beauty, healthy and whole again. The two lived happily in the mansion together. But Edison's happiness didn't last. One day, Rosemary woke up early in the morning as usual, but something felt different. Her repressed emotion resurfaced, and she remembered all the horror Edison had subjected her to. Her love and warmth for him turned into chilling horror. However, she knew that she had to keep her fears hidden because if Edison found out, he would operate on her again. Rosemary felt like she was in hell. Agony and fear slowly ate away at her until she could no longer hold back. She realized the only way she could be free from it all was to end her life. But Edison was brilliant, and she feared he would experiment on her body to bring her back. Rosemary knew she had to kill herself without leaving anything behind. Rosemary doused herself in oil from the oil lamps before igniting herself. Unfortunately for her, Edison found her and managed to extinguish the flames before she died. Edison repaired his mother piece by piece, replacing damaged organs with machinery. In saving her life, Edison transformed Rosemary into something not fully human. Being in such state, Rosemary required a lot of the purple mixtures to sustain life, so Edison altered her into a harvester, a tool to collect the much-needed ingredients. Rosemary's damaged body parts were meticulously replaced with magnificent materials. Her legs were built from high-quality wood, and her arms were now made of steel. Furthermore, her joints and muscle were connected by many ligaments, alternating with complex mechanism that allowed Edison to fully control Rosemary. She had become Edison's puppet, and like a rose, her natural beauty hides the danger that lurks beneath. Hush! Don't cry, don't cry. Don't make a sound, and I'll give you your eternal slumber. The mad scientist Edison felt the greatest joy he ever felt. His dreams of being with his loving mother fulfilled at long last. He killed without guilt or remorse. After all, humans were just fuel to keep his mother alive, nothing else. Hundreds of years passed, and Edison's appearance remained the same young boy he was. With his greatest goal achieved, he moved on to the next. Edison wanted to resurrect the person that meant something in his life, the person who raised him and never abandoned him. Albert. He resumed Benjamin's research on reanimating the dead. However, no matter what he did, he was met with failure after failure. Year after year, Edison would wound up back where he started with no progress to be seen. Even his endless determination started to falter as he began to lose hope. What if the goal he aimed for was impossible? During his sleep, he dreamt of an old, decrepit demon hiding amongst the black smoke. You've reached a dead end, haven't you? If you wish to achieve your desires, come to me. The tome was but a sliver of real power. There is still a lot you have yet to learn. The demon crowed. The next day, Edison thought about his weird dream. He thought about Benjamin's mysterious disappearance and eventual return from the southeastern border. He must have found the mysterious tome there and brought it back. Piecing the facts together, Edison came to the conclusion that if he retraced Benjamin's step, he would find the rest of the knowledge he seeks. With his destination in mind, Edison set out on his journey. Finally, you've come to find me. Haha.